You've been listening to Out of Flu Radio on Resonance 104.4 FM. Coming up next, Sound Poets Special, From Birth, Death to Bird Seed. William Bennett of Whitehouse, the pioneers of extreme electronic music, are interviewed by Mike Davis, Clive Graham and Johan Bergender. The interview will span the whole period from Come Organisation up to the release of the latest album, Bird Seed, an exclusive 2-hour special for Resonance 104.4 FM.
From Birth, Death to Birdseed. For the next 2 hours, we will be interviewing a very special guest who has been making records since 1979, and we will be chronologically dissecting the recorded work of a band who have often been misrepresented and misunderstood by the music press, although it is certainly true to say that tonight's guest has a long and controversial career. In the first interview on British radio, we will try to unmask some of the mystique that surrounds the work of Whitehouse. The interview opens with a question from Johan Bergender. The interviewee is William Bennett.
Essential Logic was your first group. What made you seek out music in the first place?
Was it really 25 years?
I think it's 23, sorry about that.
Okay.
So
no,
rude of me, I apologize.
23, 25, it's still, it seems incredible to
me.
I don't know, have you ever seen anything that you knew that you just had to have?
Yes, unfortunately.
And music was like that for me. That's the feeling, you know, it was something that I just felt I had to do. You know, when you see something and you immediately know that you have to do it.
Yes.
And you know, I was living in Edinburgh at the time, although I'm not from Edinburgh originally.
Yes.
And you know, I went for music. I went to London with £25 in my pocket and slept rough for 3 nights. That's how much I wanted to do it.
Yes. But what sort of made you turn from sort of listening to music, I mean, having it as an interest, to being creative? What was the impetus, I mean, behind that?
I think there's a desire. There's something that you want to do that you enjoy doing it, but there's also an element of you feel. I don't know if other musicians feel this, but you feel that there's a particular void that needs to be filled, and you're the one that can do it. And you know, I've always loved music. It's meant a lot to me, and I think I felt that there are all sorts of aspects of music that I would like to, as a consumer, I would like to have, have been able to get, have.
Yes.
And there was nothing there that fulfilled that.
So, what was the role of, I mean, the early industrial scene and sort of bands like Throbbing Gristle? I mean, what was the sort of influence on on you, basically, and the first things you did?
I think the most important thing was that it veered me away from the rock and roll paradigm, which was really important. It wasn't just Throbbing Gristle. I mean, Daniel, we went on tour with Daniel Miller, and I was already very interested in electronic music, pure electronic music, and with things like Throbbing Gristle, and there were some other examples at the time. I suppose Cabaret Voltaire. Even stuff like Suicide.
Yes.
Which is a lot more radical then than you might think now.
Oh, definitely.
It was very inspiring to see that you could come away from the rock and roll paradigm, and punk was all very well in its day, but it was still part of the rock and roll tradition.
Yes. So, how do you rate sort of a band like the Sex Pistols? I mean, at the time and now. Sort of,
at the time, I think they were very, very transgressive.
Yeah.
I think that in that sense, it was fantastic, very mischievous, and in that sense, very inspirational. But unfortunately, I think now it just seems like rock and roll.
Yes.
And not that good rock and roll, to be quite honest. And things age in different ways, I suppose, and the dead body, the cadaver of the Sex Pistols has decomposed quite badly, I think.
So you're not in favour of the Reformation or anything like that, then? No. Okay.
You started off with a CAM organisation, which was based in South Kensington, if I'm not mistaken.
I started off in, was it Golders Green was the first address?
Well, yeah.
So I used to go,
Yeah,
I lived quite near there until recently. I used to go past it, I was like, oh,
That's
yeah.
right, above the fish restaurant.
Yeah. It's a clothing shop now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow. It smells a lot better.
With any luck. So, how did you start the a magazine, the Carter magazine, and sort of how did you? I mean, what was the reasons for starting that aspect as well, which is sort of complementing the music in many ways?
Well, going back, it was quite, I remember Industrial News.
Yes.
I remember that format, and I remember it was exciting to receive a copy of Industrial News through the mail, and it's like having your own. Because there's no other way you're going to find out about this kind of stuff, or the things that you're interested in. You can't just find out about things through the music. So it was like having your own organ in which to express things, common interests and ideas.
At what point did you think that Throbbing Gristle lost their venom or their power?
Probably Just Funk Greats. I was very disappointed with that particular release.
Yeah.
Mostly because it was of its parodical elements. I'm always very suspicious of parody, because I always suspect that actually the parody is actually what they secretly are trying to achieve themselves. And the parody, they're saying, well, this isn't what we really like. We're actually parodying it. But I suspect that isn't the case. That is what they want. And I suspect the genesis of, he really did want to be an accepted rock star in a traditional manner, and that was very disappointing.
Did you actually have any sort of personal contact with Throbbing Gristle when you first started out in music? Did you know the members or?
Yeah, we did meet.
Yeah.
A couple of times.
Yeah.
And I went to several of them. Shows.
He's always been sort of fairly scathing of the music of Whitehouse in interviews, isn't he? Genesis Peorage.
Yeah.
Instantly and totally despised and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I just wonder what the relationship was, whether you sort of got on at the time or.
Yeah, well, we did, but that was really before the Whitehouse project started.
Yeah.
And the couple of times that I met him after that, we were in the same place. He would give me the evil eye across.
Oh, really?
Across a crowded room.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about some of the influences behind Whitehouse and Come Organisation, and one of the most notable ones is Marquis de Sade, and especially his 120 Days of Sodom. That's an important early influence, it appears, on your work.
Mm-hmm.
What attracted you to de Sade?
I mean, really, Desard can't be. The influence of Desard cannot be underestimated. In fact, if you had to take one thing, that would probably be it.
Right.
Because there's this sort of extreme form of libertarianism that he sort of espoused and expressed. Is really the one thing that it was a huge lesson for me. Really, more than 120 Days was probably Juliet was the one.
Right.
Because that contained a lot more of the philosophy,
Right.
and the philosophy was what I loved about this about sound. Very anti-religious, very anti-institution, very anti-hierarchies. This sort of slightly submerged black sense of humour running through the whole thing, a mischievousness to it, provocative.
So, by forming Whitehouse and playing Whitehouse's music, did you intentionally channel those ideas into musical sort of a musical presentation? Did you take that philosophy and, obviously it's in the lyrics? Do you think in any way it inspired the sound or perhaps the presentation of live actions?
To an extent, but it's probably more indirect than direct, because it affected me profoundly as a person.
Right.
In terms of my views on the world, and that in itself inevitably affected the way the music sounded. Although, having said that, there were like 150 Murderous Passions is directly influenced by this 120 Days of the fourth part of 120 Days of Sodom.
Do you see Desart's philosophy reflected in modern culture at all? Do you think it's more prevalent now, or do you think it's more obvious now? Is it being used in a even in a commercial way? Do you see it's more popularised than it was 20 years ago? Or do you think people still sort of keep away?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, if you go to France, I mean, Sartre is he's a literary figure, and he's certainly not that here. So it's different depending on what culture you're referring to.
Right.
Actually, I think it's a testament to how what an incredible writer he was. That somebody who was writing 200 or 300 years ago is still has such a profound creates such profound reactions. It's extraordinary. There's no other writer that can cause that. I know that you can get the books now, but I mean 25 years ago they were still banned. It's amazing.
Well, the first Whitehouse record from 1980 was Birth, Death, Experience, and it follows shortly after Comes Rampton LP, but presents a very different sound. How did you make the transition? What was the idea behind? Because Come Rampton, it's still got guitars, and albeit in a fairly unorthodox setting. Birth, Death, Experience is pretty much totally electronic. What was the idea behind that change?
I think firstly it was just having the technology was fantastic. I mean, I had sort of this sound in my mind. I wanted to create this sound. I wanted to create like a maelstrom, something intense and powerful. And then suddenly there was technology that could create that electronically. Okay, the synthesizers have existed a long time before then, but they weren't accessible. When they, the Wasps were those fantastic Wasp synthesizers came along. It meant that, I was very young at the time. I could actually afford to create electronic music, and it was a fantastic time. And being a kind of I've always been quite a purist, and I wanted to make a complete break with all acoustic instrumentation. So it wasn't just going from taking a small step in that direction. There were other bands at the time that took small steps and you used electronic sounds. I just wanted to go the whole way.
Were you in any way influenced by any of the old German electronic bands at all, or was it just purely sort of more from the late 70s industrial that you took your cue for Whitehouse?
Less from the Germans and more from... It's not really been... There haven't been that many direct musical influences So it's never been a case of, oh, I like that music.
Yeah.
Let's see how I can sort of progress from there. So you referred to Sard. That was definitely an indirect influence. So the influence is coming from there. It's more as an attitudinal thing.
Right.
That makes sense. And with music, I still love things like Yoko Ono.
Yeah.
Big fan of that. Cro-Magnon. I love that album, and all sorts of other things that Steve Stapleton used to play. From his incredible record collection. Alvin Lucia and Walter Marchetti. And you might think, well, they don't sound much like Whitehouse, but they were big inspirations.
I can certainly hear an influence on some of the Yoko Ono stuff, like Cambridge 1969, that sort of wall of feedback and all that sort of stuff, and also the Lucia Bird and Person Dining.
Yeah.
The Cro-Magnon, I fail to see. I mean, I think it's a great record. I think it's an absolutely wonderful record, but it's difficult for me to make that sort of link. But
I mean, it's just their attitude towards sound. That having heavy breathing on an album, for example. It's just to give you an example.
It's quite a menacing record, isn't it? It's got that menace. Yeah.
You still play, rock and roll live nowadays. So how, do you see your early stuff? There's lots of artists who are not very keen on playing sort of the old favourites. So what's your attitude to, in tracks of Birth, Death, Experience, say, that was released in 1980?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I have to say, and I don't want this to sound arrogant or boastful, but I'm still very, very proud of all those early recordings, everything that's been done. But I'm always very conscious when making a new album of wanting it, I'm always very conscious of, look, in 20 years' time I'm going to be holding this thing and I want to be proud of it. So a lot of thought goes into making it in terms of the way it looks, the way it sounds, the way the tracks go together. So it does stand the test of time. So that's always been a very important consideration, and fortunately, it might, for me, as far as I'm concerned, I still think it's a great album. So it's not a problem. I know some bands, they're a little bit shy about their early stuff.
For good reasons. Often.
Who do you mean exactly? Name them now.
Moving swiftly on. The album after Birthday was Total Sex, which presents a more extreme sexual side, and in some form or other it's been with Whitehouse up to the present day, I think. So how did this not change in direction, but developments have come about?
I'm not sure exactly understand.
With this album, there was more sort of sexual side being explored. So sort of for the first time in a way, I think it's sort of, there was I think a definite change in direction. So, and I just wondered sort of how it came about, basically.
I imagine how you know, all the themes of all the songs, all the albums came about, you know, because that was the interest at the time. That was one's obsessions. Those were the things one was thinking about and dreaming about, and so, you know, when you have these obsessions, you know, you have a great, you know, you have this enormous desire to express them through the music. So looking back, I imagine that was the case. That was the case. You know? And again, I was still, you know, heavily reading Sard at the time, and you know, Sard is, you know, that's a very important aspect of Sard, although not the only one.
The original cover for Rector sort of was a bit problematic. It was artwork was by Stephen Stapleton, I think. What was the reaction to that?
Well, it's a black cover. Just to describe it.
Yes,
for listeners. It was a black cover with like a shining light from above, this very large penis, erect penis, which wasn't Steve Stapleton's, by the way. Despite contrary to the
set the record straight.
And you know, we went to lots and lots of printers to try and get it printed, and you know, just there was no way we could get it printed. So in the end, what happened was we got the black covers made up specially, and then we pasted the image on the front.
The two previous records also had paste-on covers. I mean, it seems that it's all very kind of homemade, and you're sort of doing every few months there's another album as well. So there's a lot of activity happening. How are the records being sold and distributed, and was it all mail order?
Funnily enough, it wasn't, and it's record distribution nowadays is so different to what it was then. But I remember in those days, and people won't believe this when they hear it, but so the albums would. This is the way it worked. You know, you'd get the albums delivered. You know, and you're at home. You're in your room, and suddenly you're surrounded by all these boxes, which you never think you're going to shift. And then you get these sort of these mysterious phone calls from some distribution company out of the blue. You don't know how they found out about it, and they said, "Can we buy some of your albums?" What was the name? I can't remember the name of one. Zircon or something. I can't remember. There was one.
British.
Yeah, from London. He said, "I'll come round and pick them up." You know, it was fantastic. Yeah. And then, so that was one. So a lot of them went. I think a lot of them were exported to Japan and to the States. But certainly, Erector was the next one.
Yes.
There was definitely a transition there. I think that with what happened there was that there was a big step in terms of evolution of the sound, and it moved away from having nearly all synthesizers to using other types of recording, and the engineers that were working there at the time developed a new way of doing it in the studio, which changed the sound quite a lot. Even though we're actually only talking, these albums were coming out every few months.
So, what were the new types of recording? So, what were the new sort of sources or techniques?
Things like the use of tone generators and cross, having like cross feedback, and we ditched the memory man, for example, that was present. The electroharmonic, which is a wonderful thing, but that got ditched in favour of other, things like flangers and. The approach was very, very different. So, where Total Sex really followed Birth Death in terms of its recording methods was pretty similar. Although there are 2 tracks on the CD which are sort of in between. They're in the sort of intermediary, very last 2 tracks. That Erector was very, very different in terms of the way it was recorded.
It sounds a lot harsher, doesn't it? It's a lot more high end and a lot more bottom end as well. There's the 2 extremes. Do you agree that Erectus was a refinement of sound and lyrics? Do you think that was the point where you thought, this is like the sort of real stepping off point?
Yeah, and I still think. I mean, I have a lot of fondness for that album. I really think that if you pinned me down and said, certainly of the 80s, what was the most important album, I would probably choose that one, to be honest. It's to me. I mean, it still has a very, very, even though it was recorded in '81, was it? A very contemporary kind of sound to it.
Well, there's nothing else really to match it still, is there? I mean, it still sounds very, very fresh, and it's very well recorded. Very, very sharp. Fantastic on CD. I mean, I've got the record, but I mean, the CD sounds great. Again,
it was a lot thanks to the engineers who were in the studio at the time.
Right.
So who were the engineers? I mean, who was it originally, and who did it become? I mean, from A Birth Death, that was a studio recording with engineers?
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
Recorded in studios.
Yeah. So who was it that did Erector? Was that at IPS?
Yeah, IPS. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is the studio that everyone seemed to be using. I mean, a lot of the sort of Steve Stapleton Axis used to record there, or Garnham and people.
Well, it all started because it was just like a reggae studio really originally. And then Daniel Miller discovered it because he had to do some mastering, although he recorded most of his stuff at home. And I asked Daniel Miller, can you recommend a studio to me? He said, well, there's this place in the Gold Hawk Road called IPS that it's cheap and it's a good studio and the engineer's a nice guy and this, that and the other. So I started recording down there, and then Steve, I think, recorded the first Nurse for Wound album was recorded somewhere else. And then I said, Steve, you should record at IPS. So he came down then after that, and then it was just like, so from Daniel Miller onwards, it was like this procession of experimental musicians, which was great because the place, and the guy became well known for that, the guy who ran the studio. When it couldn't have been more opposite, it was. He did reggae bands, pop bands, really cheesy country rock and stuff.
There was a slight change of tack.
Suddenly it became, the epicenter for experimental music.
But how did people sort of approach Whitehouse for the first time? I mean, from the letters you got at the time and so on. I mean, what were the sort of? I mean, how were they able to get the records? How did they hear about Whitehouse? I mean, was there a particular source?
Well, the masterstroke, I think, in the beginning, and again, a lot of the things I'm saying apply to United Dairies as much as co-organisation.
Yes.
The masterstroke was putting the mailing address on the back of the records. So even if people just went into a record store and they saw it, it could be anywhere in the world, and even if they didn't buy it, I mean, it would have stood out as something very different from everything else, and they would have seen an address on the back. And this is obviously before the days of internet and email and so forth. And people would write letters, and it was fantastic to get letters from all over the world. And suddenly you created this network that didn't exist before. It was a genuine, global phenomenon.
How did you first become interested in killers, sex killers, I think, first and foremost?
It wasn't really an interest in I think this is where I think there's a misconception that there's an interest in murder or interest in serial killers as a genre. It was more specific individuals for specific reasons. As obviously in this case, Peter Curtin, for example,
Yes.
is somebody however you look at his crimes or whatever he did, it's an extreme form of self-expression, and that has always interested me. And in this case, we're talking about a serial killer, but any form of extreme self-expression has interested me, and in this particular case, I think it's a very interesting one.
So, how do you compare a person like Curtin to, people in this country like sort of Sutcliffe and Nielsen, who are also the subject matter of Whitehouse tracks, where they are quite related, but where there's sort of differences in your interest, for different people.
Yeah, I think all these individuals again, they're individuals, and again, whatever you say about their crimes, it's a twisted form of, if you like, of self-expression. And I think what's also interesting is the culture in which they occurred is almost as interesting as the people themselves. And there's an enduring fascination, mainstream of interest in these characters, and the phenomenon of being around in the times of the Yorkshire Ripper, for example, when it was happening. Everybody talked about it all the time. Who is this guy? If it is a guy, maybe it's a woman. Who knows? It was a very interesting time, and it affected all sorts of things. It was a cultural phenomenon.
A man is charged with a Ripper murder. His wife and his father go with him to court. Mrs. Thatcher Sachs, Norman Stevens, and Sir Angus Moore. The metro line's running again, and there are fewer absentees. And that's when good fuel goes faster on us. Good evening. The Bradford man, questioned by Yorkshire Ripper Squad detectives since Friday, has been charged with the murder of the student Jacqueline Hill last November. He's Peter William Sutcliffe, aged 35, a lorry driver from the Bradford suburb of Heaton. He was arrested in Sheffield on Friday night. Mr. Sutcliffe is married. He and his wife have no children. This evening, more than 1,000 people waited outside the magistrate's court in Dewsbury, where he was remanded in custody for 8 days. His wife and his father sat in court for the brief hearing. Ken Reese was there too.
The crowd began to gather early this morning outside the courtroom in freezing weather. They had a long wait. It was nearly 5 o'clock before the police convoy arrived outside the tiny court. They numbered up to 1,000 and lines of police held them back. There was a great deal of noisy shouting, much of it at speed. Before the doors of the van were opened, the accused man's father was hurried in. The crowd yelled at him too. Then, under a blanket, Peter Sutcliffe, surrounded by police, was walked a few yards to the court doorway. The noise outside could be heard inside, and the start of the hearing was delayed for fully half an hour. He was named as Mr. Peter Sutcliffe, born in 1946, a married man living in Bradford. He was accused that between the 16th and 19th of November last, he murdered Jacqueline Hill, a student, at Headingley near Leeds. And the second charge referred to the theft of 2 number plates between the 13th and the 2nd of January. Magistrates asked Mr. Sutcliffe if he wished to apply for legal aid, and the only time he spoke in court was when he said, yes, he did. He was remanded in custody for 8 days, and he'll appear again here.
In the early years of Come organisation, you were part of several collaborations, notably with Stephen Stapleton on the 150 Murderous Passions and the Bradford Red Light District LPs. How did these come about? How did these records come about?
We were very close friends at the time. We used to hang out all the time and talk about musical projects. And we just worked very closely, and we'd have these ideas all the time. I mean, these albums were coming out at incredible rate. I mean, if you might wonder why they were coming out. There was a sort of reason for them they were coming out every couple of months, because the way it worked was that without making very much money, as soon as the money came back from one release, there was enough money to make another one. And we had so many ideas at the time. We were very, very prolific. As soon as we had the money, we'd invest it in a new project.
Yeah.
And these were like, these are the kind of ideas. And sadly now, I mean, it takes, I apologise, but it takes 2 years to make an album. And something like Bradford Red Light District probably wouldn't get made now, even though I think it's a great album, it's a great idea, but it wouldn't, I'm sad to say I wouldn't have the guts to do that. I don't think.
Out of interest, actually, who does what on that record? I mean, obviously that the first side is the walking round Bradford Red Light District. Was that really Bradford, by the way?
Does it have to be?
All I say is don't believe everything you read on that cover.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Obviously.
That's what I'm saying.
But side 2 and the sort of last 5 minutes of side 1 is that more very experimental piece.
Sure.
Which personally I think is one of the best things that came out on Come Organisation. I think it's a brilliant piece. Who does what on that? It's a interesting sound on that track.
I mean, it was worked. It was done pretty much live in the studio, and everything was cracked up. So that you're getting radio recordings coming through. I imagine what the speakers.
Ah, right. That was unintentional then. That was just
It was intentional.
Oh, I see.
We did it. We cranked up all the plate reverbs.
Right.
Absolute maximum, and so you're getting all sorts of very, very small sounds had a great, huge effect. And
again,
it was
IPS was that?
Yeah.
I can imagine the desk there. If you turn everything up, you would get something come because it's right next to the Hippodrome, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
and stuff.
that's right.
So there's a lot of BBC transmitters around.
Yeah.
You could easily pick up just RF signals coming through on a desk like that.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. It was just like you hadn't got a radio on. It was just that something was coming through, like a transmission.
So what's the percussive sound on that? It sounds like a wheelie bin or something,
It's something mundane. I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something very small.
Keep the mystery.
I mean, the next phase of Whitehouse was basically 2 albums, Buchenwald and New Britain. And it's basically dealing with, I mean, I don't know if I'm wrong, sort of with the Third Reich. And because of this, there was sort of, quite a few rumours going about sort of Whitehouse sympathies. And there were stories like you marching into Rough Trade in full SS uniform, I think was probably your favourite one. And, so how do you comment on this? And I mean, and generally on sort of Whitehouse political attitudes?
I mean, I've probably got two ways of thinking about it. I think there are two, because I'm not sure what people's issues are with those 2 records. I'm not sure what their accusations are, because if you see them, okay, the subject matter, but it's not condoning anything, and it's not condemning it either. But it's not condoning anything. But these, you can walk into any bookstore or video store and you can see, or movie store or whatever, and you'll see the subject matter is covered. My personal theory is that that Whitehouse, because this is experimental, because this is avant-garde, because this is new, that people are unsure what it's all about, and when people are unsure, they assume all sorts of things.
Yes.
And I think this has happened before in all sorts of other, in an art and in music, and it's happened in general. Because you could compare it, like Joy Division, for example.
Yeah.
It's just one example of many.
Yeah. Or Throbbing Gristle,
Or
music
Throbbing-
from the Death Factory.
Or Throbbing Gristle.
Yes.
But I think Joy Division is a good example because it is safely within the rock and roll, what I call paradigm. You can dance to it, you can tap your foot to it, and people feel safe to that. They can get their heads around that. But when there's screaming feedback and subsonic bass sounds, and this is 1981 we're talking about.
Yes.
And somebody's screaming all sorts of obscenities at the top of their lungs. People are very, very unsure about what's going on. With this kind of subject matter, it makes people very, very uneasy. So I think it's partly to do with the style of music, rather than anything specifically, because there is nothing specific, in my opinion, there that can be, that there's no, as I say, there's nothing there that's condoning anything. Okay, there's nothing condemning it either.
No. So was that sort of ambiguity, or the fact that this was such a charged subject, was that part of the reason for approaching it in the first place?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I've always felt, and this applies to the entire, my entire career, everything that I've done, that no subject matter is that anything is game. That doesn't mean to say I would do everything. You only do the things that you're interested in or you want to do, but there's nothing out of limits, and it's nice. It goes back to Sard again. It's an extreme form of self-expression and libertarianism, where anything is possible. You are beyond rules. In that sense.
In 1982, you started playing live with live actions that incorporated both music and films. Why did you start doing this, basically? And why did you choose that particular format to have sort of a combination of films and sort of playing live?
We were working with these from a production.
So Paul Hurst.
Paul Hurst.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What was the other? Ross. I can't remember his surname.
Oh,
There were 3 or 4 of them.
Ross. Who was the other? Who was the Ross guy? So Ross Cannon or something like that.
Ross Cannon.
Yeah.
And they were interested. They were very interested in film, and in terms of a life, we were working together, and really, I was focusing on the music, and they did all the they provided all the film aspect to it, and I didn't really have any particular say in that. But I think it made for an interesting. It's not just like going to to the marquee and seeing a band. It was a different kind of experience. So if you had come to see Whitehouse in this case, there'd be some films, interesting music that you wouldn't hear anywhere else, and that's performing, which wasn't like anything else.
What were the films sort of shown? I think one of them was of Texas Chainsaw Massacre or excerpts from the same. What were sort of the others?
I think like wasn't it a Chien Andalou?
I think so, yeah.
And some Buñuel type things.
Yeah. And there was a film.
They did some of their own films as well.
Yeah.
I can't remember. There were a few
Cum
others.
Dome was one, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was one of their own.
Yeah. So,
I can't remember, all the stuff they showed.
yeah. So, but what was the reason for sort of starting to play live, which was taking Whitehouse in a completely new direction?
Haven't you actually done a sort of semi-private performance quite early on, prior to the first LP, even?
Sort of, yeah. I just thought it was, this is, there's potential here to do this. Like, I mean, it's an interesting question in the sense that it was never conceived as a live project when it started. But then it just occurred to me that this actually could be done live. But it was done live in a very, very different way than on the record. I never envisioned the live performances being a recreation of what was on the records. And the early concerts, the first couple of years were very improvisational.
But was there sort of a basic idea of confrontation in the first live action? Was that sort of a major, I don't know, impetus or whatever? So.
Yeah, to an extent. And there was a sort of it was provocative also in the sense that we actively looked for neutral audiences.
Was that the reason for playing? I think it was you were mostly playing pubs in the beginning, or sort of.
Yeah, very. We played in the Spanish Anarchist Centre and all sorts of weird places like that, and a couple of kind of punk type venues. But there was quite a variety of venues.
I think the Japanese noise scene has really kind of made noise into this much more socially acceptable genre, because of the Japanese. There's certainly not a threatening element to their performances. It's almost the little guys gentlemen on stage and presenting this sort of thing as in a dilettante way. And they do it in major venues like the Royal Festival Hall or something. So noise has become this kind of like, and it's fodder for major magazines like The Wire, and it must have changed the whole scene when that Japanoise suddenly became a bigger thing, and so it makes noise a kind of passé thing all of a sudden.
Right. And the other aspect, that nowadays, in those days, so you would have a completely neutral audience.
Yes.
You could go and do it. We did a show, the punk audience, for example, and none of them would have heard anything like that in their lives, let alone the way it was performed. And it was shocking, and the guy in the mixing desk, often would turn you off after 10 minutes. I mean, in the back cave, for example, which they were having all sorts of goth bands there. We got turned off after about 20
Oh yes, I've got the tape.
So it must be impossible to shock now. So a lot of the shock value of early Whitehouse performances. Obviously that element can't be reproduced at all anymore.
No. That's right. I mean, maybe there's an opportunity here if you can transcend your audience somehow to playing in different contexts. There's a possibility of that. We've got this show in Bristol in a couple of weeks' time, and that'll be interesting because it's really just an ordinary club night. So there's an opportunity there, but it will still be nothing, as you say. It'll be nothing.
Well, you'd have to play an old folks' home to have it. That'd do the trick.
But that was TG. But and also, the thing is also, there's another aspect. People coming to a show wanting a ruckus. And I remember, I think it was mid-late 90s. You thought of it, the whole thing had gone a bit overboard, turning into a Gigi Allen circus. And you stopped playing, I think, for a while. I can't remember, almost a couple of years. I'm not sure. And what do you do now to try to avoid this, or has it settled down by itself?
I think it's a very relevant question, and it goes back to what we've just been talking about in terms of audience expectations. As soon as audiences have specific expectations of what they're going to get, it doesn't matter how they react. There's always a danger in having where it's predictable.
Yes.
So they have expectations that come true, if you like, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you play in one venue, in one city, then the next time you go back there, it's like the same concert, but you continue where you left off last time, and that's the danger. And so we've had to, I've really put in a lot of serious thought in terms of presentation of how to avoid this, and constantly trying to challenge people's expectations of what they're going to get from a Whitehouse live action. And I think the last 3 or 4 shows we've done, I think we're succeeding in a limited way. So I'm hoping to continue this evolution.
Going back to 1982, you signed Sutcliffe Jugend to Come Organisation. The group was led by Kevin Tompkins, who later became a part of Whitehouse. And Sutcliffe Jugend, amongst other things, issued the mammoth 10-hour cassette box set We Spit on Their Graves. In an interview you said that Sutcliffe Jugend blew Whitehouse away at the time. What was your attraction to the music of Sutcliffe Jugend? How much of an influence was it on Whitehouse's music?
I think it was. I don't remember saying that, but I'm sure I did say it. I probably did say it, but I think it's a bit of hyperbole, to be quite honest. But nevertheless, I think SJ was a kind of was very, very obviously very, very strongly influenced by Whitehouse, but they were sort of taking it they were much more violent, much more overtly violent way, in a much more visceral way.
The lyrics are very extreme, aren't they?
And I think it had effect of it reinvigorated the group in that sense.
Kevin Tompkins joined Whitehouse. Did he have more of an impact on the live actions or anything like that? 'Cause he's a very, very good synth player. I've always thought, I've seen the live videos and hearing it and stuff, and he really does know what he's doing,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He was brilliant. And he's a brilliant vocalist, at the time as well. I thought, he was really, really good.
Yeah.
He was, if for want of a better expression, he was a virtuoso musician in the field.
Yeah.
I really think he was.
In early 1985 you released Great White Death, and the tracks of which you played at live actions for 12 months before that even. So was that something new, that you developed songs through live actions? Was that a new way of composing in a sense?
Because even nowadays, that for example, the lyrics, they take a long time to write, and they're constantly, even though we're not performing them live, they sort of evolve in an organic kind of way until they finally get released. There's a lot of fine tuning going on, and I think in that period you're referring to, it was done in an open kind of public way. Before this actually came out.
Do you still do that? Compose in that sense? Try new tracks out during live actions?
Actually, the last couple of live actions, there have been elements of that.
Yeah,
sure. But not as much as in those days, no.
On a number of occasions, you refer to this as being sort of the pinnacle of a particular period. Why is this?
For some reason, I'd been in London at that stage for about 5 years, and it was weird, but it just felt like the end of an era. I don't know if you've ever felt like that.
Yes.
Sometimes, and the same feeling seemed to happen to all sorts of other people. Kevin left London. Steve, I remember Steve moved to Ireland, I think it was. And, it was amazing how, and Dave and Tibet moved to Ireland as well. And it was incredible how a lot of people's lives all seemed to change at that one time. And in terms of musical expression, it seemed to be somehow reached the end of an era as well. And I moved to Spain after that. It's just one of those moments. Just everything seemed to happen at once. I can't really give you a reason why it should have happened.
I think there were so many other musical things happening in London in the early 80s as well. As the whole, where you could say the industrial record label, things like, and that had definitely finished by then as well. And then even things like Recommended Records, and a lot of the kind of indie punk type. A lot of the energy just seemed to go at that point. A lot of things had been done, and people had worked really hard, and then it went. London, I always think the early 80s in London was just phenomenal.
It was.
For music. All kinds of music, just brilliant.
And it's very undocumented as well.
It's your lucky day. We'll get
explained that there was a break in activities after the release of Great White Death. You started again recording, at least in 1987, for the Thank You Lucky Stars sessions. What was the reason behind getting Whitehouse back?
I started to feel, things started to inspire me again.
Right.
Started to get that, again that feeling, of, when you see something that you want to have, which you don't always feel that, and I started seeing things, and I wanted to do it. I wanted to have it and experience those emotions and express them. And I was encouraged. It was in meeting. I remember Tibet came across to Spain a couple of times to meet up with me, and it was great fun seeing him. As an old friend, and I remember Vinyl Experience they were selling a lot of this stuff in their stores, so there was the interest was still there. In fact, there was more interest than ever in that early music, and they were very encouraging in terms of re-releasing that Cream of the Second Coming compilation. Having said that, Thank You Lucky Stars was recorded. It was sort of, I can't remember, 87 or 88, with with Albini. But that particular song was Tibet came across to Barcelona, and we had a very enjoyable meal together. Came up with that idea. I mean, I always had that song in particular, I always had this fantasy of, I wouldn't say always, but I went through an era, period when I'd love to have been a kind of like a game show host, a really sadistic one.
Yes.
Sorry, you haven't won the prize.
So that one was recorded by Steve Albini. That meant you went out to the States to do it.
Well, I was a regular. I was through Peter Sotos. I was going there once or twice a year anyway to see him, and he being a friend of Albini's. So,
that was
So that's how that happened. But I was going, all through that era. I was going out to Chicago on a regular basis.
How did you meet Sotos? Was that through Albini, or was it sort of
much
the other way around?
Much earlier. I mean, I think 1982, 1981, 1982. And he used to write all the time, to the Come organisation. And when we first went to the States to tour, he joined the ship.
So
played live with us.
Okay. Had he already published books by then, or sort of, no? There was some.
No,
that came
later. He more like fanzine type stuff.
Yeah. So was it pure and so on?
Yeah.
Was there a change in inspirations for? Albums like Thank You Lucky Stars and Never Forget Death, which was released slightly later in '92. So coming back from your hiatus.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Never Forget Death is a very personal album, and there are very specific inspirations for that that are very personal to me. That it's not something I can really talk about openly. And Thank You Lucky Stars was, most of the tracks on there were over quite a long period of time. You know, these Steve Albini sessions in the sort of late 80s, and I think most of those songs actually they pretty much speak for themselves. I don't think there's anything too cryptic about them. But yeah, I mean, it was. You know, I suppose people would say that there's more of an evident sense of humour on that, you know, during that particular phase.
There was during the live actions as well, wasn't there? It was much more humorous.
Going back to Steve Albini, I mean, how do you rate? I mean, his bands like Big Black and Rape Man, which are some. I mean, sometimes exploring the same areas in a kind of roundabout way. So, do you think there's any sort of common ground between these bands?
My only, I mean, I have incredible, you know, enormous respect for Albini. He's a great guy. He's brilliant to work with. He's, you know, he really knows what he's doing. He's extremely professional. But he's a guitar player, and it's rock music, and that's where I have a problem. You know, because I really have a big problem with rock music. But as far as Albini's concerned, as far as his work in the studio, I think he's the best. He's amazing.
What's the reason behind reworking certain numbers? For instance, there's Movement, there's 1982 on New Britain, 1994, Movement 2000 as well. What was the... is that just to establish like a common link between LPs, or...?
Yeah, and I think on a number of levels, what I like about... I mean, it's almost like the album, you know, all these albums, the songs are very carefully chosen, the order in which they're played, and they're like, the Movement tracks have always been like a transition from one song to another, sort of, and they can, although it's just, on the face of it, just pure white noise, very minimalist, nevertheless it gives an opportunity for reflection, which I think is very important. So I think they work on that level. I mean, the date really just refers to the year in which they were recorded.
Yeah. Well, it's used to quite dramatic effect on Cruise, isn't it? You know, you get, so is it Princess Disease just cutting straight into it? You know, that's actually quite a dramatic use of it.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
It works really well like that, I think.
Yeah.
So,
you know, in isolation, you could say it probably sounds a bit. You know, you couldn't release it as a single in the same way. But I think, you know, and also it's worth pointing out on some of the earlier albums, there were periods of silence, long periods of silence between the tracks, and again, it had the same kind of purpose.
So it's like Birth, Death, and I think it was New Britain as well had
New Britain,
pauses.
The Rector had about a minute between.
But there's something in those silences, isn't there?
Well, there is,
Rector.
Moving swiftly on to Halogen, and on the title track there's some, I mean, pop music and disco being played in the background, and I mean, to some extent Whitehouse is very much a reaction against this kind of music, and so I mean, basically, first of all, why did you choose to use that, and what is your current take on this kind of music?
Well, actually, the everything on that particular track, they're knowing references to certain things. So it's all like a code. Everything is a code on that album, and all the if you can hear it, it's quite difficult to hear each different piece, but it all refers to something specifically, which I won't say what it is, but that's the reason it's there.
So, but I mean, is there anything now that I mean, within that sort of kind of genre, I mean, pop music, sort of like disco and so on, that you've read yourself? I mean, I think it's one of the recently published list of your favorite records, as of Italo Disco Collection, I think. So.
Oh, well, I mean, you know, speaking about music in general, that, you know, music has all sorts of different functions. I doubt there's anybody in the world that would listen to this all the time, because music has to perform all sorts of different functions for each person. whether it's for dancing to, or for when you're driving, or when you're relaxing, or when you're studying, or whatever. Or in this case, it could be for all sorts of other, experiencing very intense emotions. So there's a role for that kind of music. I'm not against it in that sense. If you ask me what kind of music I like, I can tell you what music I hate, and I really have a big problem. As I've already said with rock music.
Yes.
I just don't like electric guitars and stuff. But pretty much, I'm not too much of a snob.
No, so as long as it's not presented as sort of something beyond itself.
Yes, yeah. So I just see music having, I can actually see music having different functions for different moments in your life.
You might have to reverse this bit on the Dark Life. Whitehouse released Quality Time in 1995, and the album featured the original Just Like a Cunt. Why do you think this has become such a live favourite? And of course, it's been reworked as well as A Cunt Like You.
Well, it's probably become because we keep playing it.
Yeah,
we keep playing it for about 15 minutes.
It seems to get a good reaction, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. I suppose it has that sort of visceral quality to it. Having said that, and this would probably surprise a lot of people, and I'm not going to explain things for people. It actually doesn't have that intended purpose. It does make a specific point, which is not probably what it seems. Just to use a 4-letter word, over and over again. People might think it's just an excuse to be able to, to say that word lots and lots of times. But it does actually there is a serious point to that song.
Yeah. But we've written here, the album Quality Time seems to represent another phase in Whitehouse's development, with the title track, with the lyrics being very, very low-key and almost whispered. Was there any desired effect that you were trying to achieve by the sort of low, rather than the sort of full-on screaming vocals that characterise a lot of the earlier stuff? This more subtle approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was a conscious decision to try and expand the kind of give the variety of ways of. I mean, I'm always thinking of different ways of doing vocals, or in terms of tonality, in terms of sound, and that's in terms of the way I actually sing them, just as much as in terms of the way they're recorded. I'm always thinking about that. How you can experiment.
And in many ways, it's one of the most extreme tracks Whitehouse have ever recorded. So I don't know, sure if you agree.
Yeah. And again, Albini did an amazing job with the sound of that. It almost sounds like your speakers are cracking.
Yes. Yeah. It sounds like it's malfunctioning, doesn't it? Yeah.
And it was it actually came about through deliberately. I mean, I sort of created the original sound. Steve Albini made it when he recorded it. He made it amazing. But it was actually deliberately the wiring. It was like deliberately getting the wiring wrong or something, without being specific exactly how it was done. But deliberately did the wiring wrong. As I said, Albini did an amazing job.
Yeah.
Come on, baby. What are you? Come on, baby, trying to go the wrong way. What are you up to now, anyway? Pretty by the look aggressive, You're costing me a fortune. You're a human toilet. Come on, say a human toilet. Cunt a human toilet. Maybe a human toilet. Maybe the human toilet. Human toilet.
from the mid-90s on, you've released a number of Susan Lowley compilations, like Extreme Music from Japan, Extreme Music from Women. What were the reasons behind releasing these compilations?
I was really interested in personally exploring other music that was out there,
yes.
and not and really not music. I'm not really referring to music that was like Whitehouse,
no.
But extreme music doesn't have to be Whitehouse, obviously. And it was just a very interesting project to work on. We started off with extreme music from Japan. I think there's one of the myths is that about Japanese noise is that it started around the same time as in the early 80s, and it just didn't. It was much later in the 80s,
yes.
Mid to late 80s, but probably more to late 80s than anything. And even when Extreme Music from Japan when that came out, which was about 92, there really wasn't that much of it around at the time. Only 3 or 4 groups, I think, were doing stuff. And from then on, it sort of exploded.
Yeah. Are there any sort of Japanese bands?
Sorry, just to finish off. And I think I genuinely wanted. I thought it was an interesting project to get a really high quality compilation of that kind of music out.
Are there any other Japanese bands you rate? That are around today that you rate?
I agree with Clive actually. I think the problem is it's a kind of coffee table genre. It's the sort of thing you don't really play. It's the sort of thing that's cool to leave on your coffee table when your friends come round, and it looks cool and it's got that kind of Japanese exoticism about it. And
picture discs, nice plastic covers.
Anything. We love anything from Japan. Obviously. I think it went hand in hand at the time as well with in the late 80s. When people were very interested in Japanese video game culture, Japanese pornography, I think there was a lot of things coming from Japan at the same time. This came at the same time. It was part of that whole when we were importing a lot of these things across this culture. But I don't think it's evolved at all since then. To be quite honest. No.
So, what do you think of? It's got quite interesting cover. It's Roman Slocum's picture of Japanese girls with badges and so on. So, is that? Are you sort of going to work with him again in any way, or was it just a one-off?
That was one. He's a great friend of Trevor's.
Yes, Trevor Brown.
Trevor Brown, sorry. And he and again, that kind of. These kind of illustrations and that kind of artwork was again part of this, this Japanese culture that was coming across. I suppose it's pornography of a type, but there were a lot of, like the medical fetishes and so forth, in rather kind of mundane contexts. I think it was, I was very, very interested in that at the time.
I think. The other compilation one of the others was Extreme Music for Women. Was that sort of released as a reactions to all the accusations of misogyny that has sort of been levelled at Whitehouse through the years?
Well, if it was, it didn't work because I've got another barrage of accusations based on the fact of the cover. They read all these, because it was like a bowl of cherries, and people started reading all sorts of things into that. And then, of course, the photography inside. And by the way, it's a woman photographer who created that.
So back to the drawing board.
So if that was the intention, it didn't work. But it wasn't the intention. It was, it was. I wanted to continue the series. It was the third in the series, and that was the idea. I thought it was a great idea. I think it was a great album. I really enjoyed that project, and it was really fun as well to go out on the road. And we did Extreme Music from Women in London. About 5 or 6 of the artists performed.
And was that the Red Rose?
The Red Rose. And also we did a tour of the States. And it was a lot of fun. And it was interesting working with just going on the road with just women. Although I was DJing, and again I got a lot of stick for that. Why are you a man DJing? But if it's all women, why isn't there a woman DJing? But it's very different from doing, I've done tours with guys, it was very, very unique experience, the lack of competitiveness, none of this stuff about, oh no, we want to go on last, and they all cooperated, very. It was fantastic.
What was the difference in audience reaction? Because you could imagine that there would be some sort of guilt by association, because it's because of the Susan Lawley compilation. There would be sort of a kind of Whitehouse crowd, whatever that is, of turning up. And was there a difference in reaction compared to live actions?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, there's a lot of variety on that album as well. I mean, I think everybody will have things that they like more or less.
Yeah.
It's logical.
Yeah.
And in the live performances, there was a lot of variety between all the acts. But that was what made it great.
Yeah. So, would you say it was less confrontational than sort of a live action?
For sure. Yeah. I think there were a couple of artists who unfortunately couldn't be on the tour, who would have made it more confrontational. Like if Rosemary Malign, for example, I think she was originally scheduled to be on the American tour.
Yes.
If she'd been there, I think there would have been quite a lot of provocation.
Moving on to 1998, when Mummy and Daddy was released, and that was the last album that had a cover by Trevor Brown, who's done a number of releases over the years. And how did the collaboration start, and how did it end? I don't know if it has ended, whether it will continue.
Well, Trevor, like me, he's originally from Brighton. He used to write from the very early days with this incredible artwork. I've always been a very, very big fan of his, and we've always had very, very similar interests in all sorts of things. And it was a logical. It always seemed to me a logical thing to collaborate on, as far as Whitehouse is concerned. The reason it stopped isn't because we fell out or anything. It was because after Mummy and Daddy, I started to favour a rather extreme form of asceticism, for want of a better word, to keep everything very bleak, and deliberately taking away anything that could be construed as artistic or cute or taking away colour, and it was a deliberate. It was intended to be like that and to look like that. But it wasn't because I stopped liking Trevor Brown.
So, because nowadays it's more sort of text on the cover, which is almost like manifestos in a way. So sometimes sort of quoting from lyrics and so on. So.
Yeah, but there seems to be a move with the Mummy and Daddy CD towards much longer texts within the songs, like quite prolific, sort of really long text on some of them. Why was that? Because the Whitehouse lyrics in the past have been fairly sparse as a rule, haven't they? But with Mummy and Daddy, they're really long, sort of prosaic reams and reams. What made you decide to sort of suddenly become more lyrical in the content?
I think Peter Sotos was a big influence at that stage, lyrically, and reading his books inspired me to not directly to write in any particular way.
Yeah.
So not stylistically, but that there was a lot more that you could do with words that wasn't being that could be exploited. And even more, I mean, that I think you'll find with the latest work that you can see that's more and more evident, and I intend to go down that path. In fact, to almost the extent where if you follow it to its ultimate conclusion, you've just got a book of poetry, and there's no music at all. I can conceive that.
I mean, this album as well has a longer track, Private, which consists of recording of people in various states of distress, and it's also been used on Cruise and the latest album, Birdseed. And what's the relation of this track to the others of the album? And does this sort of entail a separation of the creative processes between you and Best on one hand and Sotos on the other?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, yeah. I think it also has as we were saying before with the movement tracks, it has that function as well, as a sort of transition process. Which why I think personally, I think it works slightly better in the middle of the album on Cruise and Birdseed than it does at the end. Because it's a way of it contrasts the artistic, in terms of this is in reality what's been created by what music after all is an abstract medium to something that's much more real and everyday. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition of the two, even though people might find it either uncomfortable. I know a lot of people don't like those tracks. But I still think, even if you don't like it, it's good. If that makes sense.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with not liking something. I still think it can be beneficial.
Yeah. So, are they referencing each other? I mean, the tracks.
Not directly, but inevitably, indirectly, they are because of the juxtaposition. It's like if you go to a museum and you've got two paintings side by side, inevitably one is going to has an influence on the other.
Yeah, because of just relative positions.
Yeah. So I think in that sense, inevitably they do. Yeah.
So, and lyrically on this album, I mean, you could say it's a themed album because of all the references, to the family, so albeit dysfunctional, such. What inspired you to take, the music and the lyrics first and foremost in this direction? Because it is a new development, I think, the Whitehouse music.
Yeah, it's. I think what you could say about it is it's very, very personal. It just focuses on, a person's most inner fears and emotions, and it's getting right. It's getting right into the soul of somebody, their innermost emotions. It's almost. Personal is the word. I think it sums it up. So it's not. There's no wider issue here, really. It's just getting right inside the soul of somebody, inside their consciousness.
So would you say it's more intimate?
Yeah, very intimate is a good word.
On the next album, Cruise, which you released in 2001, a major theme on the LP seems to be the world of sort of women's magazines and obsessions with health and food. Is this album in any way a critique of that outlook? And what angle are you actually expressing that from? It's a very, very dark recording, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an interesting point here, is that with all the that a lot of the bands that have tried to imitate Whitehouse, they focus on this sort of authoritarian element of this sadist, this archetype sadist. But I think they're completely missing the point, because really what Whitehouse is all about, and again people might be surprised to hear this, is that it wouldn't work if there wasn't an incredible sensitivity to the people, in this case, suffering, and understanding them at their level. And the understanding is at their level. It's not the understanding of the person dishing out the punishment or the treatment or the whatever. That's why it's so powerful, and that's why it touches. I think it can touch people. So in this sense, it's not. I wouldn't call it a critique of the outlook, but it's exploring those vulnerabilities and those sensitivities to an extent where I think you can actually feel that. You can feel uncomfortable.
It's very, very painful, isn't it? It's very, very painful sort of insight into certain things, and almost, dare I say, emotional
absolutely.
Very, very emotional, I found, you know, quite upsetting to a point, you know,
Yeah.
which I've not really found in Whitehouse's lyrics before,
Yeah.
for various reasons, but because this is something, it just seems a lot more human, you know. I do actually find that LP quite painful,
Yeah.
you know, very, 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 as I said before, very dark, you know. And relating to this, I mean, the track "Dance to Desperate Breath"
Yeah.
introduces starvation or whatever as a theme. How are you coming? You know, from what angle are you approaching this?
Well, again, as I say, I think you know, I've read dozens of these. What they call it, I think anorexia porn. You know, I've seen it referred to, but I mean, there are dozens of these biographies of these girls that have been, you know, starving themselves to death. And I think it's a fascinating subject, you know, and I'm approaching it from that angle. I mean, from them, you know, from their. Although in this, you know, there's another character in that particular song. I'm really still, you know, approaching it from the girls' point of view. I don't mean in the sense that I'm, you know, visualising myself as the girl, but I'm. It's her sensitivities that interest me, her vulnerabilities, and the intimate things that she's feeling.
Would you say that there's for the first time an element of sympathy in the lyrics of Whitehouse?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's a very, very valid point, and I think, as I said before, I think where that's the difference between us, that with Whitehouse, that without those sensitivities, without being able to appreciate and have that sympathy, it wouldn't work. And when bands try and copy, when they don't have that, it doesn't work.
They get the surface of it, but that's it.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It becomes cartoony, or becomes cliche.
Which sometimes reflects on you as well, because you get so grouped with the other bands. So there's a strange guilt by association there after the fact situation.
Yeah.
What started your interest in the Christ myth that's referred to on the title track of the album, Cruise Force the Truth?
Oh, it's very dangerous to get me started on that.
Too late now.
Well, I mean, I was always brought up an atheist right from the beginning. My parents told me not to, you know, when in the school assembly, you know, not to close my eyes in the school assembly. And I remember looking around and wondering why everybody else's eyes were closed and their hands were together. So, I mean, But the funny thing is, I actually find, I think religion is an interesting thing, you know, the phenomenon, if you like, of religion, and then a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago, I read, I can't remember exactly where it was, but I read a book. I think it was the Jesus Mysteries. I think it's called The Jesus Mysteries by Timothy Freak and Gandhi, I think the other chap. It's a fantastic book, you know. And in the book, this was, you know, I was reading this book, interesting, you know, about this era of history, and never for once believed that Jesus Christ was the Son of God or anything, obviously. But this book, this bombshell, said actually there wasn't a Jesus Christ at all. And I thought, that's amazing. You've got here somebody who's like a huge, read all Dessart's books in French and everything else, and hates, religious institutions and complete atheist, etc., etc. And it never once occurred to me that there actually wasn't even a person called Jesus. That never existed as a person. And it was just it was a great moment. It was one of those sort of epiphanies you have. And it's probably unfortunate.
Good choice.
So anyway, I just became fascinated and actually bought myself a copy of the Bible to start reading as literature, and loads of books on the subject. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no evidence whatsoever that there ever was a person, a human being of that name that's described in the Bible. But it's amazing. It just seems incredible to me. Firstly, that it took me that long to realise that, and secondly, that how everywhere you look, that people just, even unreligious and non-religious people, just assume that there was, because that's what it's taught in schools, and that's what's if you look in your encyclopedias and so forth. So I have to I apologise. I'm a bit of a bore on that subject, and I actively. I like it when Jehovah's Witnesses and things knock on my door. I'll invite them in for as many cups of tea as they want. If I see people sort of like, these Americans proselytising on the other side of the street, I'll cross over to their side of the street.
You'll be doing albums for World Serpent next.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Your latest album, Birdseed, which was released very recently, what's the main difference on this album and Cruise? So what's the as you feel the progression?
I think there's been a big evolution of them. You're referring before to the lyrics.
Yes.
The lyrics have gone up to another stage, and there are all sorts of stylistic techniques used which have never been used before. So there's a lot of experimenting going on in terms of the words and the way they're delivered, which wasn't. There wasn't much of on Cruise. I mean, Cruise, there's a lot of lyrics, but here there was a lot of experimenting with ways that you can use just mere words and the way they're delivered. That's one of the biggest differences. Also, there's there's, believe it or not, there's acoustic instrumentation, and there are rhythmic elements that would never have been considered before.
That's what sounds like a drum, dare I say, on
Can you reverse that word?
Shame on you.
The D word.
Yeah, I do apologise.
No,
Just like a drum.
It's the first thing really that I've heard by Whitehouse that has a conceivable rhythm.
Yeah.
Albeit a pulse. It's very much a very basic pulse, isn't it? But yeah, I was actually quite shocked when I heard that. I thought, oh my God,
It really, in that particular track is it goes back to this asceticism of reducing everything, almost like what the Daniel Miller's prophecy of reducing everything to the absolute minimum, reinventing music from the beginning, if you like, with the most basic tool. I love these voodoo ceremonies, for example, where they don't even have, if they haven't got drums, they'll just pick up a load of rocks and start just banging the rocks together, and that appeals to me.
Yeah, and there's also the last track with the sounding African vocals. What's all that about? Another quite big departure for Whitehouse.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. I don't want to precondition people the way people, the way they perceive that track, but it is African.
Yeah. There's nothing.
But I don't want to say any more. I don't want
What
to.
country is it? What language is it?
Again, I don't want to because people, if I say a country, then people are going to assume certain things,
okay.
or presume certain things, presuppose certain things.
The-
And I'd rather people's let their imaginations.
The track in question being Munkisi Munkondi,
Yeah.
the last track of the album. So. Mr. Best stated that birdseed could be the litmus test, whether you like Whitehouse or not. Do you agree with this statement, and in what sense?
I'm not sure exactly what he means, but I think what he means is that he's throwing down the gauntlet. He's throwing down the gauntlet. He's challenging people to listen to this. So if that's what he means, then yeah, I think that was true with Cruise as well. I think there was, and there's no doubt that Cruise cost us quite a few of the old fans.
Yeah.
A lot of the old fans from the 80s, they did not like Cruise at all.
Is that something you have in mind while sort of doing the album? The reactions of, your audience.
Well, it's not deliberate, but I'm prepared to take that risk. I'm not. It's a price worth paying, I think.
But it's not in any way sort of a provocation, just testing your audience.
No, because I think if you start doing that, then you become, again, you sort of fall into the trap of, you become a tool of your audience rather than the other way around. And I really want to, I think if Whitehouse is anything, it's a very, very strong sense of individuality and personal expression. And it's really important to maintain that.
At night, can you do the chicken get swim? Can you do the chlorine gargle? Can you wriggle like an eel? Shut-in freak living on the planet boys over everybody. Another cup of instant coffee, another plastic spoon, another table routine, another white boy proud of nicotine hack. What's so fucking clever about that? You little cunt. Another tube of shit paste. Squeeze out that brown hair gel squirt. Your fade long tube, big carving boy, hollow into the splash. I really don't know. No idea, no fucking idea why boy is proud of another piece of food. Taste of powder. Taste of powder. Taste of powder. Taste of powder. Because I know you're straight into the whole fucking world!
Lisa's a little girl. She's a customer here. So what are you doing here?
Having dinner.
He took me into the bathroom, closed the door. I knew I couldn't get away. I knew I wasn't strong enough to fight him. And he put me in the sink and proceeded to try to enter me, and I said I had AIDS, and I told him to put on a condom, and he just smirked at me. He he thought I was lying, which I was, and I knew that he didn't believe me. And I said, come on. I said, why don't you just put on the rubber, right? And I said, come on. And he was trying. I was fighting him a little bit. And I was trying, you know, I didn't want him to penetrate me without the rubber. I said, let me go. I won't scream. I'll show you where the rubber is. And so then I went into the bedroom area. I took the rubber out of the drawer, and I handed it to him. I didn't see him put it on.
Watched your trial. It was very abnormal. I was raped.
Get fucked! Why you lie about child molested gropes and far-fetched flashes of pervert creeps and anal virginity and Polaroid snaps and verbal abuse and bathroom rapes? I don't know how well you can. Remember your own pointless mute-sniffing adolescence? That bumbling floppy sex in between bags? Those pathetic fist fights? All those pathetic petty thefts? And this and that, this and that, this and that, this and that, and every other fucking adolescent cliche cringe. What are you taking out of fighting glass at your shop window reflection? Enjoying the sticking line maintained. Because that's the difference between you. Yes, that's the difference between you. Yes, that's the difference between you. You let a living scumbag be drinking wax. Raise your nostrils with pulse of smell from fingertip nicotine and anal wax. Force an open dead mouth off of ounces of semi-chilled sweat. To give you kill that.
Are there people working in sort of any kind of other media that you sort of have any sort of regard for today? I mean, you mentioned sort of Chapman Brothers before in the interview.
Yeah, I mean, I like quite a lot of. I mean, I think art is probably the most exciting medium that there is at the moment. You know, I think if I had to choose between art and music, you know, I prefer art, and I would like to think that Whitehouse transcends music the way it is today in that sense towards art. You know, I think, you know, I like Tracy Emin, I like Jenny Savile, I like all sorts of these so-called British artists and so forth.
So, what are the sort of the qualities you sort of appreciate there? Because it's I don't know. I don't know if there is a sort of a link with, I mean, the music of Whitehouse. Or is it sort of the subject matter, or is it just the execution?
I don't know if there's a link or there's even subject matter, but firstly I enjoy their art, and also I admire the fact that these are people who are genuine. They're genuine examples of self-expression at an extreme level, and you just don't get that. It's very rare.
Yeah, that's about the only level I can handle Tracy Emin's work, is that she's very revealing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
She's totally naked
in every way.
Not so much physically, but she does expose herself.
Yeah. I really admire that.
Yeah.
And you know, the first track on the album actually is the title comes from one of her pieces.
Oh, okay.
Why you never became a dancer?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I think it's like a video installation at Liverpool Tate, which is great. It's a brilliant piece.
Yeah. So, is that from her youth, or is that one of those videos?
Yeah.
Well, for me, I've always had a view of Whitehouse as being. I mean, you have to kind of like when you hear something new, you think, well, how do I? What is this? Is this rock? Because I mean, Whitehouse, it was something new when I heard it, and it doesn't have the. It's kind of a rock thing because there are lyrics, but there's nothing else. There's nothing else that can anchor it into anything that's like from a rock school, apart from the fact it's got lyrics. And I've always thought that it is almost like like records by artists where you get things like maybe Boyce has done things with text base or a little bit of sound. You think, it's more kind of an art project. But I think that was strongly denied by Whitehouse in the early days. Really, you didn't have so much time for art then. Whereas now it seems, well, obviously it's sort of like getting on for a quarter of a century later. No longer a teenage project. It seems to have come around to being more of an art thing. I mean, I suppose it's difficult to say what's next in any sense, but are you working on anything at all at the moment?
Really, it's just there's a sort of feeling of after every album there's so much I can't underestimate. I can't overstate how much emotional effort goes into each one of these albums.
So you take a
and
break.
There's a sort of period where you just sort of, just to get over, like a sort of vacation afterwards, and I'm still in that sort of process.
But the projects start from readings and writings.
Could be anything. It really is. It's amazing how I always admired Picasso for that, not necessarily for his art, although I think he was a great artist. But for his right until he died, he was constantly searching for new inspiration and new ideas and new ways of doing things, and I admire that, and I feel the same. I'm just constantly searching, and every moment of the day is a potential opportunity for me.
It's also the fact that he was always working with new media, like he was sort of scratching photos and so on.
Quite obsessive kind of, and every day would be drawing and painting of some description as well. So.
And for somebody to be doing that, to old age, I think it's absolutely it's so rare. Especially, and even more so with music, because musicians can be so lazy. They invent a style, and they'll just stick with that for the rest of it. They'll be happy because they can make a career out of it, and they'll just sit on that. There've been no further experimentation for the rest of their lives, which I think is.
In fact, it usually goes the other way. There's less and more and more of the same, and more and more turgid. I mean, that is the path of so many. The music biz on the whole. And I suppose the art world is much more of an open-ended thing. Anyway, more possibilities.
Right.
So maybe that's one sort of way forward. I mean, there's, in a sense, there's been this sort of emphasis on graphics and so on. Is that maybe one of the ways you are sort of working into other media?
Yeah, but I think I think it's exciting. I think there are a lot of ways that it can be that it can evolve through. Again, who would have thought? Through acoustic instrumentation. I want to do more of that. Through words. Words are fantastic. There's so much you can do with words. I'm very interested in word art, words as art, and colours and. Juxtapositions. It's endless. There's no reason to sort of stop and think, well, I've come to the end of the road. This, if there's a wall, you can't go beyond this. That's never going to happen. Hopefully. And
so I think that's a good note to end on.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
It's been very enlightening.
You've been listening to Whitehouse, Birth, Death to Birdseed. The interviewers were Johan Biergander, Mike Davis and Clive Graham. The interview was coordinated by Johan Biergander and took place on the 15th of February 2003 in North London. The songs by Whitehouse featured in the show were Rock and Roll, Erector, Ripper Territory, Buchenwald, The Second Coming from Live Action 1, Arse Destroyer, Try and Be Grateful, Quality Time, Dado, Cruise, Force the Truth, Munkizi Munkundi, Wriggle Like a Fucking Eel, Birdseed, Why You Never Became a Dancer, and Neronia. You also heard Rampton 1 by Cum, Bradford Red Light District Part 2 by The New Order, and Right to Kill by Sective Hugin. The programme was produced by Clive Graham. We wish to extend our thanks to William Bennett for his kind cooperation.
Welcome to our out-of-hours broadcast, featuring a selection of programs from Resonance 104.4 FM.